I knew something was off the second I pulled up to where my mountain mansion used to sit. Gone. Flattened. Nothing but splinters and a half-buried mailbox that still had my name, Benjamin Powers, printed on it in gold. I killed the engine and stepped out of my black Ford Bronco, boots crunching over the splinters that used to be the wraparound deck I built myself. I stood there for a full minute, heart hammering in my chest, trying to process. Then I heard that high-pitched, nasal voice that made every blood vessel in my neck throb. Well, if it isn't Mr. Too Good for HOA rules himself. I turned around slowly. There she was. Amber Bellington, the president of the Silver Ridge HOA. 50-something, overly highlighted hair, that smug, tight smile she always wore like a weapon. She was holding a clipboard like it was a sword. "You did this?" I asked, my voice low. "We issued multiple warnings, Benjamin," she said, flipping through her papers. "You failed to pay over $7,000 in fines, code violations, unauthorized deck extension, non-compliant fence height, and of course, the infamous sunflower flag." I blinked. "You demolished a house over a flag." Amber raised her eyebrows like I just asked if water was wet. "It was political imagery, against HOA decorum." "That flag had a sunflower on it, that's the state flower," she shrugged. "It's not our fault you refused to cooperate, we followed proper escalation procedures." My fists clenched. "Where's the demolition permit, Amber?" "It was approved by the board, unanimous vote." "You mean your cousin Todd and your wine club friend Cheryl?" "Still a vote," she said, already spinning on her heel. "You should have read the bylaws, Benjamin. You're not above the rules just because you think you're special." She strutted back toward her white Lexus. I stared at the wreckage of my home, the wind kicking up dust from where my porch used to be. Too bad Amber didn't know what I did for a living. See, I'd kept a low profile since I moved up here. Grew out my beard, wore flannel, didn't talk much. Folks just thought I was some quiet guy who liked hiking and grilling steaks. None of them knew the truth. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the governor of the entire state. And Amber Bellington had just declared war on the wrong man. I didn't drive back to the Capitol that night. Instead, I booked a room at the old lodge down the mountain road, the one with creaky floors and hand-carved banisters. Nobody there asked questions. They remembered me from when I'd first moved to Silver Ridge before the election. Back then, I was just a guy looking for peace and fresh air. Now I was something else entirely, a man with power and a reason to use it. The next morning, I met with the county sheriff. Rick Callahan had a handshake like a bear trap and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You're telling me they leveled your entire house," he said, pulling a toothpick from his mouth and dropping it into a small metal tray on his desk. "I'm not telling you," I said, dropping a folder onto the desk. "I'm showing you." Inside were high-res satellite images from the state's Department of Geographic Information. I'd called in a favor less than an hour after Amber strutted off. The images showed the house standing on Wednesday. Flattened by Friday morning. No storms, no accidents, just a paid demolition crew with a backhoe and no legal permit on file with the county. Rick flipped through the pages, frowning deeper with every turn. "They told us it was an accessory structure, a shed or something, not a residence." "Didn't even go through zoning," he muttered. "They lied," I said flatly. "And that's not a civil issue, that's criminal misrepresentation." Rick sat back, nodding slowly. "You want me to bring them in?" "Not yet," I said. "I want to know who signed off on the crew in the first place, the company. The contract, the payment, follow that money." Rick tapped a finger against the folder. "I'll get my deputy on it, but if what you're saying checks out, this isn't just about some HOA overstepping, this is organized fraud. And possibly conspiracy to commit property destruction," he grunted. "You always did think like a prosecutor." I didn't respond to that. Not out loud. By noon, I was sitting in a folding chair at the back of the community pool house, dressed in jeans and a windbreaker, a state ID badge clipped to my shirt. I didn't announce myself. I didn't need to. The Silver Ridge HOA board was meeting in their usual closed-door fashion. But I'd brought a court order from the district superior judge that compelled them to open the meeting to residents, citing ongoing investigations and the public's right to transparency. The door opened. Cheryl Evans, the HOA secretary, blinked at the sight of me. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Just stepped back, letting me walk past her into the room. Amber was at the head of the table, sipping from a tall, insulated cup and scrolling through her tablet. Her heels clicked as she stood, her entire expression flickering for a half-second before she forced it into something polite and tight. "I wasn't aware we had guests," she said. "You're aware now," I replied, walking to the center of the room. "This meeting is now public." "By court order." Her jaw twitched, but she didn't argue, not in front of the dozen residents who had followed me in, whispering among themselves. "I'd like to address the board regarding a matter of urgent legal concern," I said. "No need," Amber said, folding her arms. "We're already aware of your grievances." "Good," I said. "Then you're also aware that the structure you demolished last Thursday was not an accessory building, but a state-registered primary residence with full occupancy permits, verified by the county assessor's office." She glanced at Todd, the treasurer, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "You claimed unpaid fines as justification," I continued. "Fines which, according to your own ledgers, were never formally invoiced, never sent certified, and never itemized with applicable bylaw references." Amber shifted. "We have internal processes, not anymore," I interrupted. "As of this morning, the state has frozen all HOA financial operations pending investigation." Gasps rippled through the room. Even Cheryl looked stunned. "You can't do that," Amber snapped. "We're a private entity." "You have no jurisdiction." I pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder I'd brought and handed it to her. "Emergency executive order," I said. "Signed under state authority." "You'll note the language. In cases of fraud, misrepresentation, or destruction of private property under false pretenses, all community governance bodies are subject to legal audit." She stared at the paper like it might catch fire in her hands. "And just so we're clear," I added, "I'm recusing myself from any oversight role. The State Attorney General's office is assigning a special investigator, independent, neutral." "You're trying to ruin us," Todd muttered. "No," I said. "You did that when you hired a demolition crew using embezzled community funds." The room fell silent. Cheryl dropped her pen. "Wait, what?" I turned toward her. The check that paid for the crew came from the Community Improvement Fund. "It was listed as landscape leveling. You signed off on it, Cheryl, you and Todd." Amber's eyes darted wildly between them. "I didn't know what it was for," Cheryl protested, voice shaking. "You initialed the disbursement," I said. "Either you were grossly negligent or complicit." Todd stood up. "I'm not going down for this." Amber filled out the disbursement forms. "She told us it was for park maintenance." "You're lying," Amber hissed. "No, you're lying," Todd shouted back. "You've been siphoning funds for months, Amber." "I saw the receipts for those patio heaters at your house paid for with HOA money." "Enough," I said, raising a hand. Rick Callahan stepped into the room, flanked by two deputies. "We've seen enough," he said. "Amber Bellington, Todd Vance, you're both under arrest for misuse of community funds, criminal misrepresentation, and destruction of private property." The residents erupted in stunned whispers. Amber tried to backpedal, but the deputies already had her wrists secured behind her. "You can't, this isn't," she stammered. Rick read her rights with the calm detachment of someone who'd done it 100 times. Cheryl slumped in her seat, eyes wide and distant. I walked out before the cuffs clicked shut. I didn't need to see that part. Outside, the sun was climbing high over the ridge. A few neighbors stood near the pool gate, watching everything unfold. One man nodded at me, eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a while around here: respect. I walked past him without saying a word. There was still a lot to do. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like the mountain might actually be mine again. 3 days after the arrests, I stood in what used to be my kitchen. surrounded by scorched pine needles and fragments of ceramic tile. A forensic survey team was documenting everything, now measuring, cataloging, photographing. One of them crouched near the half-buried remains of a support beam, calling out measurements to another. The bright orange flags marking evidence fluttered in the morning breeze like tiny warnings. The fire inspector, a slate-gray man named Darnell, stepped around a pile of charred lumber. He'd been called in after the sheriff's office found something odd in the wreckage, chemical traces that didn't belong in a standard demolition. "You were lucky to catch this when you did," he said, tugging off his gloves. "Someone tampered with the structure before they leveled it. Accelerants in the floorboards. Looks like they wanted to make sure it couldn't be rebuilt." "Gasoline?" I asked. "Something more exotic, industrial solvent?" "Not something you buy at a hardware store." He gave me a long, meaningful look. "This wasn't about code violations. This was planned. Someone wanted this place erased." I stared at the crushed remains of the fireplace I'd built with reclaimed stone from an old mining town. There was no code infraction that explained soaking a house in flammable chemicals before knocking it down. "Send everything to the AG's office," I said. "Chain of custody, full report." Darnell nodded and motioned to his team. I turned away and walked back toward my truck, where a woman in tailored navy slacks and tortoise-shell glasses was waiting with a tablet in hand. "Governor Powers," she greeted me crisply. "I'm Special Investigator Lena Brooks, assigned by the Attorney General's office." "Let me guess," I said. "This is bigger than Cheryl's patio heaters." She tapped her screen, pulling up a map of Silver Ridge and the surrounding parcels. "We've uncovered financial transfers routed through shell companies tied to the HOA's improvement fund. Over the last 16 months, over $250,000 have been funneled into off-book accounts." I raised an eyebrow. "Personal enrichment?" "Partly," she said. "But most of it was used to purchase surrounding properties at auction parcels that had gone into foreclosure after residents were hit with inflated fines." "They were driving people out," I said slowly, "so they could buy the land, correct? And once they controlled enough of the surrounding lots, they planned to consolidate and sell to a development firm. We've already subpoenaed the firm's records. They had a standing agreement to purchase the entire ridge once the HOA secured 75% of the acreage." "Let me guess who brokered that deal," I said. "Amber Bellington." "She was the point of contact," Lena confirmed. "But she didn't act alone. We found emails implicating a consulting group in Denver that specializes in community revitalization projects. They've done this before." I exhaled slowly, the pieces clicking into place. Silver Ridge wasn't just a power trip for Amber. It was a land grab. A long con masquerading as neighborhood governance. "Where's the money now?" I asked. "Frozen," Lena said. "The state treasurer's office cooperated immediately, but we believe they were preparing to move it offshore. You stopped this just in time." An unmarked SUV pulled up behind us. Two men in suits emerged. One of them handed Lena a folder, then glanced at me. "We've got confirmation," he said. The demolition crew was subcontracted through a shell contractor with no operating license. The owner, Todd Vance's brother-in-law. "Paid in cash." Lena flipped open the folder, scanned the contents, and snapped it shut. "We'll move forward with federal charges. This crosses state lines." As they left, I sat on the tailgate of my truck, staring out over the valley. The ridge was quiet again, no HOA board pacing the streets with clipboards, no petty threats taped to front doors, just the sound of wind through the trees. That afternoon, I called a town hall meeting. The community center hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Every seat was filled. People stood in the aisles and lined the back wall. Some I recognized: retirees, teachers, young couples with kids. Others I didn't. But every face was tense, waiting. I stood at the front, no podium, no microphone. Just me and the people who'd been trampled by a system meant to serve them. "I didn't come here today as your governor," I began. "I came here as your neighbor, one of you, someone who believed this place could be a home. A few heads nodded. What was done to this community wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. You were lied to, manipulated. Your homes were leveraged against you, and when some of you couldn't pay the fines they invented, they took your land and sold it behind your backs. A murmur rippled through the room. I saw a man in the fourth row clench his jaw, his hand tightening around the armrest. But that ends now, I said. The Silver Ridge HOA has been formally dissolved. The board is under federal investigation. And starting today, a provisional council made up of volunteer residents will oversee community decisions until we can hold new, transparent elections. Someone in the back clapped, then another. It spread slowly, then surged into full applause. And there's more, I continued. Every fine issued in the last 2 years, every fabricated charge, every retaliatory penalty will be reviewed. If it was illegitimate, it will be voided and refunded. A woman near the front wiped her eyes and whispered something to the man beside her. I know trust doesn't come back overnight, I said, but it starts with truth. And with your help, we're going to rebuild this place, not just the homes, but the principles we thought we were living under. Afterward, people approached one by one offering thanks, asking how they could help. A retired firefighter with a background in construction volunteered to lead the rebuilding of my house. And others who had been forced out offered to testify in court. Later that week, I met with the state legislature's housing committee. We fast-tracked a bill that would place strict oversight protocols on all HOAs in the state, mandatory audits, public access to records, and criminal penalties for predatory enforcement actions. It passed unanimously. By the following month, Amber and Todd were formally indicted on 12 counts, including fraud, racketeering, and destruction of property with intent to defraud. Cheryl cooperated with prosecutors and received a suspended sentence in exchange for her testimony. The developer who'd planned to buy the ridge backed out. Public pressure and media exposure had scorched their brand. Their stock dropped 8% in a week. As for Silver Ridge, it changed. People who never used to speak to each other now shared tools and built fences together. The new council, made of teachers, veterans, and small business owners, held open meetings, streamed online for transparency. The old fear was gone. I never rebuilt the house the way it was. Instead, I worked with that firefighter and a team of volunteers to design something simpler, smaller, with a deep porch and wide windows facing the valley. Whenever I sat there now, coffee in hand, I didn't think about the wreckage. I thought about what we'd built afterward, a community that finally belonged to its people again. And I made one quiet promise to myself. If any HOA ever tried something like this again in my state, they'd wish all they'd done was break a fence ordinance. A month after the town hall, I got a call from Lena Brooks as I was stacking firewood behind the frame of my new porch. She didn't waste time. We found something buried in the HOA's internal server backups, she said. Encrypted files. Took us a while, but we cracked them this morning. I dropped the bundle of kindling into the crate and wiped my hands on a rag. What kind of files? Audio, she said. Board meeting recordings, not the official ones. These were off the books, recorded on a private device belonging to Todd Vance. Something tells me we're not talking about mundane budget discussions. No, she said. We're talking about a conversation that took place 3 days before your house was leveled. I leaned against the railing. Play it. She patched in the file. The audio was grainy but clear enough. Amber's voice came through first, sharper than I remembered. We can't wait for another lien to process. The governor's too high profile. We need a clean break, remove the structure and bury the paper trail. Then Todd, what if it backfires? Amber again. It won't. The crew's off record, the permits are ghosted. By the time he figures it out, the land's already transferred. Silence. Then Cheryl's voice, hesitant. And if the press finds out, Amber, we'll say it was a mistake, blame miscommunication. He's a politician, he'll want it buried. The file ended there. Lena's voice returned. That recording alone nails conspiracy. But there's more. We found a second file from the following day. This time it's Amber talking to someone new, male, older, not on any of the board rosters. "Did you get a name?" We ran the voice print. Match came back as Byron Kepler. Ever heard of him? I had. Byron Kepler didn't live in Silver Ridge. He lived in a penthouse suite in Denver and ran a private equity firm that specialized in distressed property acquisition. He was the kind of man who always wore 2 watches and never answered his own phone. Lena continued. He promised Amber a commission 5% of the development deal if she secured the ridge, said she'd get a seat on the advisory board once construction began. She sold out the entire community for a side gig. And a property in Vail, Lena added. She signed a purchase agreement 2 days before the demolition. Cash offer. I looked out toward the tree line. "I want a federal prosecutor on this." "Already in motion," she said. "Kepler's firm is under investigation for racketeering. If we can link him to similar HOA land flips across the western states, we're looking at a criminal enterprise." "Get the IRS involved too," I said. "You know, a man like him didn't report that kind of side payout." After the call, I drove down to the county courthouse. The district attorney's office had already set up a task force to handle the Silver Ridge fallout, but I needed to press one more matter. I found Assistant DA Rachel Pereles reviewing a wall of case files in the conference room. Her sleeves were rolled up, and there were color-coded tabs sticking out of every folder. "You think you can bring a RICO charge?" I asked. She turned toward me, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "If we can prove multiple people coordinated with intent to defraud residents and use the HOA structure to facilitate that fraud, then yes. We're almost there. Kepler's involvement gives us the interstate element we need." "What about residents who lost homes due to fraudulent fines?" I asked. "Can we recover any of their property?" She nodded. "Already filed injunctions to freeze all HOA-controlled properties and halt any pending transfers. Once we get convictions, we'll move to reverse the deeds." "Good," I said. "Let me know when we're ready to file." "I want to be there when the warrants are served." It didn't take long. 3 days later, Byron Kepler was arrested at a private airfield outside Aspen. Lena had coordinated with the U.S. Marshals. Kepler had been attempting to board a chartered jet to the Cayman Islands. They found 2 burner phones, a briefcase with currency from 5 different countries, and a flash drive containing a list of other HOA partners across 3 states. Meanwhile, back in Silver Ridge, the residents were rebuilding more than just homes. The new community council had established a legal defense fund for those still fighting to reclaim their properties. A retired legal clerk named Warren took charge of organizing case files, and a local librarian offered space at the library for document scanning and printing. At the next council meeting, I sat at the back, just listening. The energy in the room was different this time, focused, determined. No one was afraid of speaking up anymore. An older man named Hank stood and addressed the room. "I lost my wife's garden. It was the last thing she planted before she passed, and they bulldozed it like it was nothing. But I'm not here to cry about it. I'm here to say I'm planting something new, and I bet I'm not the only one." Applause followed, not loud or flashy, but steady. Earnest. After the meeting, I walked out into the cool evening air and found Lena waiting near the flagpole. "You're not staying for the vote?" she asked. "They don't need me for that," I said. "They've got it handled." She nodded once. "Kepler's arraignment is scheduled for Monday, federal court. He's being charged with conspiracy to defraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and 4 counts of racketeering. Amber and Todd are both turning state's evidence. Cowards always do when the wall's close in. They're naming names. Kepler's firm had ties to 12 other HOAs across the state. This is just the beginning." We stood for a moment, watching as the last few residents left the building, some arm in arm, others deep in conversation. "Funny thing about corruption," I said. "It's always loud until people start paying attention, then it gets real quiet." She smiled faintly. "You ever think about making this permanent, staying here full-time?" I looked up at the stars breaking through the clouds above the ridge. I already did. Over the next few months, the state legislature passed 3 new laws governing HOA operations. Mandatory third-party audits. Public disclosures for all board financial decisions. And the big one, a state-run ombudsman agency empowered to investigate HOA abuse without waiting for complaints. The Silver Ridge case became the model. Kepler's trial drew national attention. Lena testified, so did I. The jury took less than 2 days to convict. He was sentenced to 20 years without parole. His firm was dissolved, assets liquidated. A portion of the proceeds went directly into a restitution fund for the communities he tried to gut. Amber, Todd, and Cheryl were banned from holding any governance position in any residential community for life. Their plea deals included community service, restitution payments, and public apologies broadcast during prime time. The mansion I lost never came back. But the porch I built after stood taller in a way no blueprint could have captured. Every board was cut by someone who lived here, sanded by someone who cared. And when winter came, the fire inside burned steady. One afternoon, as snow began to fall, a boy no older than 10 rode his bike up the gravel path and handed me a folded paper. It was a hand-drawn map of Silver Ridge, the lots, the trails, even the creek. In the corner he'd written, "Thanks for saving our town." He didn't wait for thanks. Just turned and pedaled back toward the road. I pinned that map above my workbench and stood there a while, watching the snow gather on the windowsill. They tried to take everything. But in the end, they gave us back something better, a reason to fight, a reason to stay, and a reason to believe that no matter how far corruption reaches, there's always a way to cut it down root and branch.